Shall we? All right. And let's see, here are the modules, whole bunch of them. Okay, 7 in all. So let's talk about module 1. We revisit two major types of fraudster, the situational or accidental fraudster and the predators. Okay, predators are the central focus of this chapter. Module 2, we're going to drill down into a second key feature of complex frauds and financial crimes. They most involve collusion across multiple individuals, organizations, and jurisdictions. Module 3 closely examines how fraudulent and corrupt organizations are dismantled through a little legal tool that we have called asset forfeiture and seizure. Good stuff. I'll tell you some stories about that when we get there. Module 4 outlines various complex frauds and financial crimes, including organized crime, drug trafficking, terrorism financing, money laundering, RICO violations, conspiracy, U.S. Patriot Act, Bank Secrecy Act, Mail Fraud Act, wire fraud, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA, and across the pond, the UK Bribery Act. And by the way, if any of you walk past my office, I have hanging just inside the door. Not sure I have the blinds open enough so you see it. It's a poster that I actually picked up at the United Nations at their Vienna, Austria headquarters. Going into it, the UN is quite involved in fraud, and especially with regards to counterfeit goods, which have been used in the past to fund organized crime and terrorist organizations. So be careful when you're buying something, especially like what you think is a high-end luxury item. It might actually be a knockoff, a counterfeit good that's actually helping finance some really bad people. So be careful with that. But yeah, even the UN is involved in this stuff. Going on to Module 5, we're going to look at the U.S. banking system and its role in international money movement. Module 6 will examine the various tools and techniques often exploited by bad actors to move money clandestinely, including international movements, money services businesses, bulk cash smuggling, trade-based money laundering, shell companies, casinos, insurance, trusts, informal value transfer systems, virtual money, which is becoming huge. Bitcoin was originally created and really got going, being used by bad actors, including drug narcotics dealers and arms dealers, and even cell phones. Okay. Then Module 7, we're going to examine other complex frauds, including tax evasion, how appropriate, a week after tax day, bankruptcy fraud, and securities fraud. Whew. So let's get going here, folks. Okay, Module 1, the predator, versus the situational fraudster. Most of what we've been talking about with business frauds is a situational fraudster. It's the bulk of fraud cases. The first-time offender is a middle-aged male, married with children, trusted employee, who is now in a position of responsibility, considered a good citizen of the community, but then, for some reason, a non-shareable problem comes up. Can't talk to other people about it. But it's one of those problems that can be solved with money. Well, that creates the perceived pressure. When discovered, others are often surprised by the alleged behavior of the predator. And this is who Edwin Sutherland described as white-collar criminals. And he was the one who came up with that terminology. Also called occupational fraud or economic crime. Okay. So, as opposed to what we're going to be talking about mostly here, the predator. They often start out as the accidental fraudster. And you know what? And they got away with it. And they said, hey, that was pretty easy. Okay. On the other hand, there's others who just sort of, wanted to get into criminal activity or have been involved in criminal activity of other kinds and now is moved into fraud. So they are the predator seeks out organizations where he or she can start a scheme almost immediately upon being hired. Um, Again, this is what they do. They deliberately defraud the organization with little remorse. Um, Usually they are better organized because, again, this is, in a sense, this is their occupation. So they're better than that, uh, situational fraudster. They're better at concealment schemes. They know how the system works. Very often they're networked with other folks who can, give them tips. And they're also better prepared to deal with auditors and other types of oversight mechanisms, including law enforcement. So, who does that include? It includes organized crime. Okay. So when you think of organized crime, you think of, illegal gambling, narcotics, things of that nature, maybe gun running. But as we legalize gambling, that's kind of dried up for organized criminals. We in most of the states have legalized marijuana. That's gone into their hit their wallet. So there are other types of frauds that they can operate. And again, with the beautiful internet, you can have an organized criminal gang on the other side of the world conducting schemes using the internet, going after folks in the U.S. and other Western Western countries, because that's where the money is. Okay, and they're come up with schemes to separate you from their money. But we have a lot of homegrown ones here as well. So we also find individuals and organizations that have operational modus operandi, where a complex fraud or financial crime is inherently part of their goals and objectives. So now maybe all they do is fraud, but very often these organized criminals are involved in any number of type of schemes. Okay. Organizational crimes occur when public and private companies, nonprofits, and government entities, okay, otherwise legitimate law-abiding organizations are involved in a pattern of criminal activity. Okay, so they might look like, if you ever watched, Sopranos or any sort of mob thing, they might even have a front company where they're conducting their criminal behavior. Organized criminal activities often involve many individuals, organizations, shell companies, and cross-jurisdictional borders. Okay. Again, the vast number of frauds are done by individuals or small groups, but we also have the predators who can be involved in organized crime. Predators and organizations focused on criminal activities exist, and reference to these types of entities as predators helps us to better understand their activities and motives and examine allegations of fraud and financial crimes. Okay, let's move on to Module 2, collusion among multiple individuals, organizations, or jurisdictions. Okay, almost by its definition, organized crime, needs more than one person. So, collusion is a central element to complex frauds and financial crimes. Collusion may be among individuals within an organization, individuals across different organizations, multiple organizations where the organization itself, is a criminal enterprise, and often span multiple jurisdictions. When individuals work in concert with each other, the damage can be devastating and more pervasive. Internal controls within an organization are often ineffective in preventing fraud when there's collusion involved. Okay, and then the mixing of legitimate and illegal activities. And that's, again, this is what a lot of organized criminals do, is they very often move into an already established legitimate enterprise to then operate their illegal enterprise within it. So the most complex fraud financial schemes include a mixture of legitimate and illicit activities. Money laundering is an excellent example. Okay, so you've got money coming in from fraud or from some other type of activity, let's say narcotics sales, and you need to launder it. Okay, you want to make it look legit. So the simplest example I can think of offhand has always been, again, drug dealers tend to operate cash businesses, right? So folks that are out selling heroin aren't accepting credit cards. As far as I know, they accept cash. Now you got a big old pile of cash. What are you going to do with all that cash? Well, very often you're going to launder it through a legitimate business. For example, some business that still deals a lot in cash. Maybe a small convenience store. Okay, maybe a think what organizations use cash? Convenience stores, to some extent, movie theaters, but that's kind of dropped out as the price of tickets go up and people are charging for their tickets. But movie theaters have been good in the past. Um, Jewelry stores that buy junk gold, we found this has been used is good. Um, ATMs. Okay, we've found organizations that will, and you can go out and buy it. My good friend Robert Siciliano, who's out in Boston, he and I wrote a column for the New York Times Online for a couple of years on fraud, and he's appeared on TV shows in the past. He was on Steve Harvey when he had his talk show, and what what Robert did was go out, bought a used ATM, one of those small ones you might see in a convenience store or a laundry. By the way, also dry cleaners and pizza parlors have been used for money laundering. And he bought this thing and this machine, and he was, showing the different things you can do with it. Use it for money laundering, where you take that money derived from narcotic sales, stuff it in the machine. Then people come to withdraw, $100 from the machine. Fine, you put in your card. But by the way, they also get your card and your PIN number that way, and it gives you back, $100. Five $20 bills. Now, mind you, if you tested that money, you would find that it all, a drug sniffing dog would challenge it. So, but ATM's been used for this purpose, besides just people stealing them and cracking them open and taking the money out of them. But he even did a thing where he was placing these ATMs on, like outside bars in cities and hooking it up, and people would come to him, run their debit card in them, punch in their PIN, and then it would display, sorry, not working, and they'd walk away. Well, he's got the account number and the PIN number. So, oh well. But anyway, so that has been used, and even churches have been used, either with the cooperation of the pastor, head of the church, or just the people that count the cash, where they exchange. They bring in the dirty cash and exchange it for clean cash, because very often churches, the collection plate is one of the places where they still use currency. Okay. Challenging, again, these mixing of legitimate and illegal activities, challenging for investigators to isolate the illicit from the legitimate. So fraud and forensic accounting professionals must know the greater organization, even if the organization is not recognized as a legal entity. So very often when we talk about organized crime, the organization, may not be chartered as a corporation or an LLC, but it's nonetheless an organization. Okay, it's formal, just not recognized as a legal entity. Okay. So most complex fraud and financial crimes include that mixture of legitimate and illicit. One of the main challenges is to isolate the illicit, and again, is essential for prosecuting these crimes. Module 3, dismantling the organization. Using what? Using asset forfeiture and seizure. Asset forfeiture or seizure, an important part of dismantling an organization. what's the purpose of seizing the assets? Okay. And the assets you're seizing are assets that were either purchased with the ill-gotten funds or have been used to perpetrate the crime. So by seizing the assets, the perpetrators are being punished, right? And then the organization is dismantled by making it more difficult for another person in the chain of command to take over the remaining operations. Okay, so if you go in and you arrest the person who put the phony ATMs in the convenience stores to launder the drug money, great. But you probably should grab up those ATMs as well. And while you're at it, grab up the very often vehicles and boats and such that were used or that were purchased with the funds. There is a spot just outside downtown Chicago, and I'm not going to tell you where it is. I know it is where it is. I've been there, where the federal government, where the various agencies, the FBI, ATF, Secret Service, postal inspectors, they will go out and grab up assets. And very often we're talking about luxury cars. And this looks like the lot for a luxury car dealership. Some incredible cars parked in there, which then once they get the okay of the court, they auction them off and hopefully then give the money to the federal government to hopefully reduce their taxes. Anyway, they also have a lot of boats in there on trailers and bunches of other stuff. But I could tell you where it is, but I'm not going to. Anyhow, the investigation needs to show that the perpetrators, or the organizations involved received the assets and what happened to those assets. So again, you have to go to a court, swear out affidavits to show the judge, yeah, this guy was running this criminal operation, and with the proceeds, he bought this, Lamborghini or Porsche or what have you. And then the judge signs the warrant, and then the feds go off and they grab up the cars. And it's as I say, some incredible cars they have in there. Module 4, schemes and illegal acts associated with complex frauds and financial crimes. And by the way, you can grab up those. The federal law allows the seizure of these assets. I believe state law in Illinois also allows for it. Okay. So what are the various schemes associated with complex fraud and financial? Okay. They again, these schemes align more with these, so we say, professional predators than they do with the accidental fraudster. The motivation and intent is nefarious and deliberate. Okay, it's not the accidental fraudster whose spouse is running up big medical bills and doesn't want to share that with anyone and is embarrassed, or what, maybe whose child got involved in something and they're trying to get some money, and so they pull a fraud scheme. No. These folks' motivation is different, the predators, right? And their intent, again, nefarious and deliberate. The mode of operation is more sophisticated. Again, there's collusion involved. They tend to be sophisticated and often very disciplined, especially in those frauds where we talked about white collar fraud. We also talk about red collar fraud, red standing for blood, where people involved, if they get out of line, are punished physically. And they're really on the cutting edge of technology. It is amazing. Some of the first people, as we've developed information technology systems, and now AI, some of the first people to really grab onto it, early adopters, as we say, are the bad actors. Okay, fraudsters are really. Sadly, I saw a presentation on this. There are like two groups that are early adopters of a lot of this technology, and as I say, the predator fraudster and also pornographers. Okay, they're early adopters of technology. Financial statement fraud. Okay, usually this is a complex fraud. There have been some cases where it's not, especially small business, maybe not a complex situation, but we're talking, goodness, if we're talking a publicly traded corporation, which is where you get the best financial statement fraud, because again, if you want to make money in financial statement fraud, you need a company that's going to be involved with, high stake finance. So it's going to be a complex fraud. Almost always involves the chief financial officer, unless, and there are cases where they have a CFO that's been there and who is essentially clueless. Okay, has been sort of, just waiting for retirement and has just been sort of, um, treading water for the last few years, and you can just slip all sorts of stuff past him or her. But it usually involves a CFO, the controller, or some other sophisticated participant within the financial reporting structure. Executive level individuals often work in concert with this CFO or such to override the system of internal controls. Now, when you talk about corruption schemes, again, I'm talking about these big organized crime corruption schemes. Those are ones that involve bribery, illegal gratuities. I talked about that and how, it might not be illegal in some cases anymore under the federal law. And the recent Supreme Court case involving the mayor of Portage, Indiana. But that is where you pay someone after you get the big contract. Okay, it's not here, I'll pay you now, and now you give me a big contract. Get the big contract, and then they get a gratuity, a big gift, if you will. Economic extortion, in other words, pay me or I'll stop sending contracts to your company and you will have to go bankrupt. And conflicts of interest, okay, where you've got, you're selling, your company is selling goods to another company at a very low price because you own that other company or things like that. In these cases, at least one party and possibly all involved set out to achieve certain goals as a result of their activities. All right, now let's get back to organized crime. And the Organized Crime Control Act of 1970. Okay, so we're talking the Nixon administration. And they came in and they really had an agenda of going after organized crime. As we'll see in a minute, one of the tools they used was this thing called RICO, the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. And that, by the way, was written by a Notre Dame University of Notre Dame law professor named Robert Blakey. Interestingly enough, his son is a federal district court judge right here in the city of Chicago, down there at 219 South Dearborn Street. And he has been nicknamed Son of Rico, since his father wrote and promoted the idea of the RICO Act. Again, we'll talk about that in a bit. But included in the RICO Act was included in the Organized Crime Control Act of 1970. And it made unlawful the activities of highly organized, disciplined associations. So that's the key. The key is it's not just say again, an organization is committing wire fraud. Okay, that's already illegal. Mail fraud. Okay, that's already illegal. Securities fraud. Okay, that's already illegal. But what it said was, if you have formed an organization that are doing these things, the organization itself is a violation of the law. Okay. So this was a way of getting at, not just the individual acts that these organized criminals were doing, but saying that the organization, mere existence of an organization that was committing uh, these preconditioned acts makes the organization itself illegal. So again, the term organized is central to the definition of the Organized Crime Control Act. Many organizations involved in organized crime are professionally run. Again, they're opportunistic, diversified, very often requiring political support and capital investment. The annual impact of organized crime profits is estimated to be over $1 trillion a year. Okay. Now, examples of organized crime groups, and this is particularly big on the East Coast and in parts of Europe. Russian mobs. In the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, a lot of we have these again. Frankly, every ethnicity has organized crime, but due to the size of the old Soviet Union, we a lot of the folks from Russia came to the East Coast where they're now running organized crime mobs. We also have organized criminals from Africa who specialize in narcotics and financial scams. Okay, it used to be, it started out as you'd get a fax, right, from the Nigerian prince who wants to share his wealth with you. Again, we found a lot of organized crime. Then they went to the internet, and you had emails and now text messages being run out of African countries, originally out of internet cafes. But now internet's much more accessible, and it's you see this organized crime. The Eastern Europe has a lot as well. There are entire villages in Eastern Europe that are the prime source of the revenue in the village is victimized Americans due to internet fraud. And the local officials, the local police, even some of the national police are all in on it. And thus it's hard to go after them because of what's going on. We also see the same with a lot of boiler room operations in India. Now, unfortunately, the Indian government is good at cracking down on this. But again, it's all over the world. My alter ego, Professor Fraud, has a motto, which is fraud never sleeps. And it doesn't, because when you're in bed here in Chicago, there's somebody over in Europe, Asia, Africa, even Australia probably. I don't think too many out of Antarctica yet, who is working professionally to separate you from your money. All right. Again, we have the crime groups in the former Eastern Bloc countries, the Italian mafia, La Cosa Nostra, and in the Balkan countries, they also have organized criminal enterprises. Basically, this whole slide should have said, everywhere around the world, except maybe Antarctica, there are organized crime groups that are trying to separate you from your money. What do? They try to manipulate and monopolize financial markets. Okay. Very often, they infiltrate labor unions. We've sadly have had a history of that in the United States with certain unions, and that has been cleaned up for the most part in the United States, but we see that still going on in other parts of the countries. Often they align themselves with a traditional business. Of course, if one of the best assets an organized criminal organization can have is by themselves a politician, especially one that controls things, law enforcement. That could be your state prosecutor, your county prosecutor, the U.S. attorney. Back in the day with Al Capone, um, Capone was known to pay off the Secret Service. And the Secret Service would then, if they got wind of when Elliot Ness and his guys were going to, say, raid one of Capone's distilleries or breweries, they would pass the information along to Capone's people. Why? Because they had an agreement. Secret Service at the time, still involved in this. The big thing was going after counterfeiters. So they had an agreement with Capone's guys were out on the street. They knew what was going on. If they heard of a counterfeiter, they would tell the Secret Service, and then the Secret Service would go and arrest the guy. Capone's gang didn't care about counterfeiters. And in return, the Secret Service heard that there was going to be a raid during Prohibition. They would tip off Capone, and then they would shut down the operation. And Elliot Ness and his guys would show up, and there'd be nothing there. Okay. Okay. Understanding the storyline, the who, what, when, where, how, and why, and the flow of the money. All right. The old saying, follow the money, that provides the solid investigative approach for developing a case, such as drug trafficking. The trafficking of narcotics for illegal sale in countries all over the world. We have Mexican drug cartels that have significant market share of illegal drugs transported into the U.S. But we also have other countries that are doing it. We know that a significant portion of fentanyl is coming in from Asia. Okay. And then we've got cocaine that's coming in from South America and things like that. Countries form partnerships to tackle illegal drug problems. So, it's often very dangerous because these groups are often quite nasty. But the United States works, especially our friends in the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and I've known folks who work for DEA. They've got offices. They operate out of embassies all around the world, working with the local forces who are trying to fight drug trafficking. And they like it because, the guys that are the head of the cartels in, say, Mexico are causing a lot of trouble to the politicians in Mexico. So maybe they could grab them up and try them and put them in a jail in Mexico. But it's so much easier to grab them up and hand them over to a DEA agent who will fly them back to the United States, and then we put them in a supermax prison here in the U.S. after a trial, after being found guilty. So that's, you see this every now and then where the heads of cartels are grabbed up, often by the paramilitary police in Mexico or in South America. Colombia used to be horrible in this, but the government down there, working with the U.S., has cleaned that up significantly. So illegal drug trafficking costs the U.S., again, $1 trillion annually, estimated, of course, because the drug traffickers don't get audited. The probability of detecting drugs drop considerably once they enter the United States. So we try to get it before it crosses the border. So bilateral and multilateral counter narcotic efforts are the key effective response to fighting drug trafficking. And again, the drug trafficking organizations are considered highly, highly professional. So recommendations: we improve our coordination among U.S. drug fighting agencies, strengthen the legal institutions in Mexico and other countries where drugs are produced and transported, improve multilateral coordination between the U.S. and other nations involved in the counter-narcotics efforts. Frankly, the United Nations is also involved in it with the multinational approach, and continuing and expanding programs that emphasize demand reduction in the U.S. and other countries with large numbers of narcotic users. So that's often the argument these countries say is that, U.S., why did you, if you didn't have so many people willing to pay good money for these drugs, we wouldn't have a problem down here with cartels, selling drugs to the U.S. and murdering people as well. What about terrorism? Okay. Terrorism, as its main objective, is designed to intimidate, that is to say, to terrorize a population or to compel a government to do or abstain from doing some act. Terror organizations need funds to operate. You can't pull off terrorism without some money. So you try to deny the terrorist groups access to the international banking system. Aha, they cut that off. They can't get any money. Well, they have other ways to get around it. Okay. But it does impair their ability to raise funds. So the primary sources of terrorist financing is state sponsorship. And by state, of course, we mean nations. It's not like Indiana is doing it, okay? But nations that sponsor terrorists. And then also revenue generation from legitimate and illegitimate activities. As I say, the UN has got a special group just going after counterfeit goods and how those are being, that Rolex watch that you were able to buy for, $75. Guess what? That's not a real Rolex. All right. Probably more than 75 even. But we know terrorist organizations are using these fronts to fund their activities. Terrorists utilize less restrictive overseas banks. They know who they are, also know what countries they operate in. And they also use charities as fronts to fund terrorism. And down in Colombia, not so much anymore, kidnapping, but in other countries as well. I knew someone who works for a big corporation. They went to do a stint down in a South American country, and they provided him with kidnapping insurance, which you can buy, so that if you are kidnapped, when the kidnappers contact the company says, talk to our claims agent at the insurance company, and we'll work out, how to send the money over that we, had. And then the insurance companies negotiate the ransom. Kind of wild. So the terrorism triangle, for some reason, we always talk about triangles in this course, is opportunity, ideological motivation, and ideological rationalization. So opportunity, just like in our standard fraud triangle. So that's most important to investigators, because without opportunity, to generate, move, and control cash flows, the financing of terror just can't occur. So instead of that pressure we talk about in the traditional fraud triangle, we talk about the ideological motivation. They have an inherent motivation to inflict terror. And then the ideological rationalization, they rationalize their activities based on their ideological beliefs. Okay. Lifestyle symptoms. Okay, so we got the movement of funds through certain countries. We have money flowing to foreign beneficiaries located in Persian Gulf states. We have the use of wire transfers for business activities that would not normally generate wire transfer activity. Okay. Financial activities inconsistent with the stated purpose of the business. Financial activities not commensurate with the stated occupation of the individual. And the use of multiple accounts at a single bank, but for no apparent legitimate purpose. Okay, so you got that, pizza parlor that's, laundering the cash from the narcotics, from the drug dealers, and then they're, depositing these huge chunks of cash, maybe every day at their bank, maybe into different accounts, and then they're wiring some of it out to Mexico or to the Seychelles Islands or to Malta or some of these other places with somewhat lax banking laws. Really, why is a pizza parlor regularly wiring money to, Malta, the island of Malta? Doesn't seem, make a lot of sense. All right. Additionally, the use of high dollar currency and traveler's checks not commensurate with the business's purpose or the individual's lifestyle or occupation. So again, if that pizza parlor is making that deposit at the bank and there's a lot of $100 bills in that deposit, especially the ones that are made to a particular, they have multiple accounts of this one account they make deposits to. It's always in $100 bills. Seems odd for a pizza parlor, right? This structuring of deposits at multiple branches of the same bank to avoid the currency transaction reporting requirements. So they've got an account at Chase. It's got branches all over the city. So they take one big huge chunk of cash. They deposit at the Chase in Evergreen Park. And then they deposit another chunk at the Chase branch in Oak Lawn, and another at the Chase branch in Madison, and another up in Elsip or wherever. And, probably not the main branch downtown Chicago. That would be a little risky. Okay, and again, all to avoid generating a currency transaction report because they're depositing, thousands of dollars in cash. Also, the use of false identities, documents, or straw men. As I said, one of the easiest ways opening up a phony bank account is you go down to, a homeless area, pick up some guy. We've seen this done in Chicago a lot. That put them up in a motel for a couple of days, buy him food and such, clean him up. And then you walk him into a bank and you have him open the account under his name. And once you do that, then you put him back out on the street. And then you're using that, this guy, this straw man, to as the identity of that bank account. Again, explaining the privacy and secrecy benefits of sympathetic international jurisdictions. Again, this moves around the world as, goodness, it used to be, I'm old enough to remember when Switzerland was the big one, and then the Bahamas and the Cayman Islands, and then the pressure from foreign countries on those places. They changed their banking laws. Then it moved to Seychelles Islands. I'm told those have improved their banking laws. Malta, the island Malta, has become big lately. So it'll keep moving. It'll keep moving around. So money laundering. Trillions of dollars illegally move each year through various formal and informal financial systems. It's the process of making dirty money appear clean. It takes place in what we call the three stages of money laundering. Placement, placing money into the financial system. Layering, sometimes called smurfing, hiding or disguising the source of the money. So you don't want to say, yeah, this is money from drug trafficking, right? And then integration, using money without risk of being associated with dirty money. So it's you mix it in with clean money, and you don't know it's dirty then. The idea of money laundering, you must deprive the criminal of the use of their ill-gotten gains. Right? That's where we go after that. So what is placement? Okay. The initial stage of money laundering involves placing it into a financial system. At least three general methods are available for placement. You find that cash-based or cash-heavy business that can be integral to the placement stage of money laundering. And again, since the pandemic especially, that has dried up a lot, okay? As some of you know, you might go weeks without doing a cash transaction. And so, as I say, this is why ATMs are being used. So you're giving out the cash and you're getting an electronic, withdrawal from somebody's account. Again, there's some businesses, it used to be movie theaters, not so much anymore, but still pizza places, some diners, bars are still good. And as I say, churches as well. So you need that cash heavy business. Then you structure cash deposits to fall just below that federal reporting guideline. Okay, that can be a means of placing the cash into the financial system. You don't want to, drop off, $20,000 in cash at the bank. Okay, that will get reported. Or just carrying the money offshore to a country with bank secrecy and privacy law. If you watch the old the videos I have on Crazy Eddie Antar, there was a thing where Crazy Eddie would duct tape cash to his body and fly out of the country. Okay, specifically Israel, which is a long flight. There are much easier destinations in the Caribbean you could go to, but or otherwise ship it out. Okay, carrying the money offshore, and then once into the financial system, then you have the electronic trail of money transferring. Okay, beginning. Layering is used to hide or disguise the source of the money. Inherent goal of layering is concealment of the true source and destination. Layering may involve foreign countries, especially those countries who have, favorable bank secrecy and privacy laws. Okay, they don't disclose to governments, foreign or domestic, the owners of accounts, or the accounts just have numbers and not names on them. Then the money can be moved to other banks. Good money laundering, you transfer that money around the world several times. And law enforcement usually gives up after the first few transfers. Integration. Again, if you transfer to talking about wire transfers, transfer to a bank in a country where law enforcement can get paid off. So they're not going to help the law enforcement back in the United States. Then integration, the attempt to convert the placed and layered money back into the hands of the perpetrator in a form that the perpetrator can use without risk of prosecution. The main issue with integration is ensuring that the source of the money and the transaction itself appear to be legitimate. Perpetrators have two choices: spend the money they cannot show came from a legitimate source, or launder the ill-gotten proceeds so it appears that the source of the money are legit. And sometimes it's a combination of the two. Launder it around and then use that now cleaned up money to buy a hard asset that can be converted back into cash. I had I did a presentation on this to the FBI on the use of fine art in this practice. But also gold is good, okay, and rare coins are good, stamps even. And the nice thing about like fine art, you can buy fine art in one country, and in some countries you'll pay cash for it, and you've got a $100,000 original, Monet, and then you put it in a shipping tube along with some $10 movie posters, and it goes through customs, and they can't tell the difference, and ends up in another country where you then walk that Monet into a auction house, and they sell it, and they hand you, $100,000 or $90,000 after they take their 10% cut, whatever. But now, very cleaned up. Okay. One nice attribute of money laundering is that ultimately the money must start and end at the same spot. Okay. So or at least at a determined spot. Okay. Money Laundering Control Act, the MLCA of 1986. Okay. There have been amendments to it and what happens is Congress, and law enforcement first informs Congress, and Congress changes the law, amends the law, because the bad actors keep changing their methods. So first you had the MLCA back in 1986. This was before we started coming up with cute names, and for laws, like RICO. Though that actually was earlier. So then in 88, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. In 92, the Annunzio-Wiley Anti-Money Laundering Act. Was Frank Annunzio, who was a congressman from Chicago. And forget where Wiley. So usually when you see a name like that, it's like one member of the House of Representatives, one senator. So Annunzio Wiley. Then the Money Laundering Suppression Act, the Terrorism Prevention Act, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And then following 9/11 came the USA Patriot Act. All right. So in order to prove money laundering in court, you have to show the financial transaction was attempted or conducted. Doesn't have to show it was actually conducted. Just attempted is enough. That the defendant knew the proceeds were derived from some unlawful act, the property derived from a specific unlawful act, and that the defendant attempted to accomplish one of the following: promote a specified unlawful act, okay, SUA. So the federal law lists, there's a laundry list of what unlawful acts are involved here or can be involved here. They can show that, or they try to conceal the nature, source, location, ownership, or control of the proceeds of an SUA. They attempted to avoid federal reporting requirements, or the one that gets them every time, they attempted to evade taxes. Okay. Just, if you are doing any of these things, go ahead and pay taxes on it. I actually saw a case in federal district court in Chicago where a politician was accused of accepting bribes. And one of the charges against him was that he evaded taxes by not paying taxes on his bribes. In his defense, his defense attorney showed that on his 1040 form, he had a line called other, which were the proceeds of his bribes. And he actually did pay taxes on his bribes. And as a result, the U.S. attorney had to drop that count. The other counts went forward, but couldn't charge him with tax evasion, which is often the one that carries the heaviest penalty. So if you're going to do illegal activities, pay your taxes. Okay. Now, as we were talking about before, the forfeiture, grabbing up all those ill-gotten gained goods. One of the principal goals behind money laundering laws and regulation is that of seizure. Forfeiture requires probable cause that connects the property to an illegal act. And this is one of the things about this law, and it's been challenged in court, but it has been upheld, is you don't wait until you have a trial and the person is found guilty of, usually you have to have a trial, find the person guilty of committing a crime, and then you get an order to go and seize the property. Under the federal code, all you have to do at the beginning of, once you've investigated enough to get sufficient proof, all you need is the probable cause that this asset was connected to an illegal act. So then you go into the usually takes place in a federal judge's chambers. You go in, and the prosecutor's there, and the federal agents are there, and they've signed affidavits, or sometimes they get sworn in. Sometimes takes place in the courtroom, and they're sworn in. They testify that what happens, and say, Your Honor, we believe we have probable cause that this luxury boat and this guy's condo in Aspen and house on Lake Michigan, and 5 Maseratis were all paid for with the ill-gotten gains of this illegal activity. And again, just on probable cause, that warrant will be signed, and then the feds go out and grab the stuff up. And later you can show the court that, oh, no, he actually inherited this money, or he won it in the lottery, or what have you. But that's later on. It's already been grabbed up. So forfeiture requires probable cause that connects the property to an illegal act. The civil litigation threshold is a direct association between the criminal act and the property subject to seizure. In the criminal realm, courts will allow substitute property to be seized. So it's like, he's got a bank account in in Malta with $5 million in it, but he also owns a $5 million house up in Lake Forest. Well, in that case, go take the house. Okay, that's if it's a criminal act. This is an area where the U.S. Attorney's offices usually have a criminal division and a civil division. The civil division usually handles, people who get hit by post office trucks or, something like that. But they also handle these forfeiture cases because, again, civil, it's a lower standard of proof. Under federal law, all property involved in money laundering, as well as violations of the Bank Secrecy Act involving currency reporting, are forfeitable. So, and very often you'll see if some politician or whatever, I'm thinking Rita Crundwell out there in Dixon, Illinois. And again, I recommend to everyone in this course to watch, you can see it on various platforms. The movie All the Queen's Horses. It was produced by my friend Kelly Pope at DePaul University about Rita Crundwell of Dixon, Illinois. And they charged her with money laundering. And she eventually pled guilty. But one of the things they made her plead guilty to was money laundering because that gave them the excuse of seizing up millions of dollars of her property, including a whole bunch of show horses, which then the marshals auctioned off. Again, they talk about it in that movie. All right. So let's talk about Financial Action Task Force. That sounds like quite the name, huh? So the Financial Action Task Force was formed in July 1989 by the G7, which are the top countries around the world: the U.S., Canada, England, France, Italy, Japan. I'm trying to think who else was in the G7. Maybe Spain and Germany, something like that. In any event, along with the European Community and 8 other nations, okay? And they analyze international money laundering and make recommendations for changes in banking and criminal laws. The FATF has identified 3 times when money laundering is ripe for detection. 1, the domestic entry into the financial system. Again, that's placement. The transfer of funds abroad for the purpose of integration. Again, layering. And then the transfers back to the originating country for repatriation, and that's integration. And then comes RICO, again, drafted and promoted by law professor Robert Blakey. And I've written Dick Riley on this because the title they have is misspelled. It's the racketeering influenced. There's a D at the end of that. Let me check to make sure I'm right on that. RICO law. Okay. Yeah. Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Now, what's key about this, again, it was originally intended to go after organized crime and, classic organized crime. The, not long ago, garbage or trash companies in the state of New Jersey was essentially all owned by organized crime. They moved in, took them over, and then were using it for their activities. So they said, okay, we want to go after the organized criminals and their crimes, but also we want to grab up, seize these companies. And so when they wanted to stop organized crime from moving in on companies and taking them over and then using that as a front for their criminal activity. And so RICO was created, and it said, okay, if you've got an organization that's involved in criminal activity, the government can seize, can take the whole organization. And then some wily lawyers looked at the way the law was written and said, it doesn't have to apply just to racketeers, okay? It can apply to any corrupt organization. And the Supreme Court agreed that the title is actually two separate things, okay? You have racketeer influenced, and again, there should be a D at the end of influence, racketeer influenced organizations and corrupt organizations. So a lot of folks who got caught up in RICO early on said, hey, our organization isn't, there's no, mafia involved with us. And the court says, doesn't matter. It can be either racketeer influenced and or corrupt. Your organization's corrupt. You're doing securities fraud. Don't have to be a racketeer for that or a mobster. All right. And so it's seen as, you can have a corrupt organization. So someone like Bernie Madoff was charged with under RICO. Was he a mobster? No. Did he run a corrupt organization? Oh, yeah. Okay. So it addresses organizations involved in making dirty money clean. The original goal was to allow investigators to go after businesses and other entities that were involved in organized crime. Essentially, RICO makes it illegal for any person who has received funds that derive directly or indirectly from a pattern of racketeering to invest or acquire any other business that is involved in interstate or foreign commerce. RICO also provides for the forfeiture of assets used in racketeering crimes, permits treble damages in civil cases. Okay, so if you have a client that got ripped off by a business that was involved in wire fraud, let's say, wire fraud, mail fraud, those are all listed in the RICO statute as being these, crimes of a racketeering activity. So if your client, say, lost $100,000 to somebody who is operating a mail fraud scheme, okay, sue them and add a civil RICO count, because the damages may be $100,000, but you can get a verdict for $300,000, treble, 3 times damages, and then you as the lawyer get to walk away with $100,000. You very often lawyers will charge a 1/3 attorney fee. So RICO Civil has become very popular because it triples the amount of, if you will, award that you can get for your lawsuit. Okay. So RICO outlaws the investing illegal funds in another business. It outlaws the acquisition of a business through illegal acts, such as kidnapping, assault, murder, okay, or the conduct of business affairs with illegal acts. So if part of what you do in your business is you go out and firebomb your competitors, yeah, that's an illegal act. All right. So what does racketeering, what constitutes a racketeering act? Well, the RICO statute specifies a laundry list of crimes, and they add to it every now and then, but it includes, violent crimes, such as kidnapping, murder, arson, and robbery. Okay. Other felonies such as unlawful gambling, bribery, extortion, distribution of obscene material, and controlled substance trafficking. Every now and then when I was working in federal court, we'd have a case come through with the distribution of obscene material, and then the court had to decide whether it was obscene or not. That made for some interesting days back in chambers. Violation of money laundering laws, violation of the Bank Secrecy Act, and the big catch-all in so many of these are mail and wire fraud. Labor offenses, Okay, violations of acts regarding labor unions and such, and then also securities fraud. Conspiracy is also conspiracy to any of those. Conspiracy is a crime in and of itself. Okay, so even if you were setting up to perpetrate a wire fraud crime, but you never got to it. Okay, well, at least I didn't violate any laws. Wrong. You may have violated the conspiracy law. Okay, you don't have to pull it off as long as you conspired to pull it off. So, conspiracy targets the individuals involved in the illegal activity. Conspiracy is one of the laws, listed in the RICO statute. So, 3 elements to conspiracy. The co-conspirators must have an agreement between them. The co-conspirators must act or demonstrate an inclination to commit a crime. Again, no crime has to be committed. This was, Rod Blagojevich, when he was convicted, he said, look, I didn't accept any bribe money. I didn't pay anybody off. Okay, so what? You did, however, have an agreement, and you did some, positive acts to further, or demonstrate the inclination to commit the crime. It wasn't just, small talk at the bar. You were actually doing something. You may not have accepted the money or paid the money. Doesn't matter. You conspired. And then the participants must mentally commit to the act through their state of mind. That's the hardest one to prove, but actually has been done many times. From a practical perspective, the prosecutors need to prove the existence of a conspiracy. Okay, there was this plan amongst different people. A willing participation in the conspiracy, the defendant's knowledge of the conspiracy, and at least one overt act was completed in carrying out the conspiracy. So maybe it's some sort of a wire fraud, scheme you've come up with. And I'll even give you another one, a mail fraud scheme. Okay. Mail fraud scheme. And, the conspirators, okay, we're going to do this mail fraud scheme. We're going to go out and we're going to mail out 10,000 phony invoices to companies for copier repair services that were never done. But we figure that a certain percentage of companies are going to go ahead and pay the invoice anyhow. Okay, you're using the U.S. mails to commit a fraud. And one of your members of your little group, went out and bought a postage machine. Or maybe went out and bought stamps, but more likely to buy a postage machine. Okay, guess what? There you got an overt act. Okay, that's all it took. And then maybe after they bought it, they said, yeah, this was really kind of a stupid scheme, so let's give it up. Or maybe they went out and they bought the paper to print off the phony invoices. That's an overt act. Okay, doesn't take much to carry out the conspiracy. Now, the USA Patriot Act, and of course, USA actually stands for Uniting and Strengthening America, and Patriot stands for Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act. So a lot of times I see USA Patriot Act spelled out. The word patriot is all capitalized because those letters actually stand for all those words. So this came out not that long after 9/11. And so you see all the letters USA Patriot stand for something. Identify new types of money laundering crimes and increase the penalties associated with them. Sets out procedures for the forfeiture of bulk cash that had been smuggled. Okay. I mean, there were cases where people using, the big shipping containers that you'll see, maybe on the back of a railroad car as you're waiting there on University Parkway for that darn train to go by because you're late for class. Um, Folks have, maybe not the entire shipping container, but we'll put something in it, put in a false wall, and then fill it up with cash, and then put in another false wall and have some other stuff in it, and then ship it off to some other country. Yeah, I mean that's one way of laundering money. Um, and then permits the confiscation of all property of an individual or entity who participates in the planning of a terrorist attack. So you were involved in the planning of a terrorist attack, we can take up all your stuff. Go on. Okay. The Patriot Act outlaws money laundering, including funds generated from foreign crimes of violence or political corruption, funds generated from cybercrime, funds generated from offenses related to supporting terrorist organizations, and funds related to the bulk, smuggling of cash. Then we have the Bank Secrecy Act, or the BSA, passed to assist in the investigation of illegal acts associated with drug trafficking and tax evasion. Attacks the placement stage of money laundering. Requires that financial institutions maintain adequate records and that financial institutions report certain types of transactions to the federal government. Okay, because they found out that, there were some banks that were in on it, and their, reporting mechanisms were, shall we say, lax. And so this says, hey, banks can't get away with that anymore. Okay, not only are we going to require you to maintain good records, we're going to come in and look at them. And you don't want to get, tied up in this stuff. Additionally, transactions involving suspicious persons must be reported on a suspicious activity report, an SAR. Okay, so again, you've got somebody, coming into the bank, twice a day, dropping off big chunks of cash, even though they don't hit the reporting requirement amount. And they look a little funny, and they don't really tell you where the money's coming from. And yeah, write it up, send it in an SAR. Okay. And it might, if it doesn't launch an investigation, it'll be there. You're covering yourself as the banker by reporting it, and it can come back later if they say, hey, what's this person been up to, and they can find that SAR. All right. Additional reporting requirements. Okay, the movement of more than $10,000 into or out of the U.S. must be filed on a FinCEN Form 105. And I'm going to check that. FinCEN Form 105. Yeah, it's still $10,000 in U.S. dollars or the foreign equivalent. Some of these laws over time they changed it out, so it's 10,000. The CTRC must be filed by casinos when a person conducts a transaction in more than $10,000 in currency. Yeah, casinos became good places for money laundering. Not anymore, maybe. And the FBAR requires that each U.S. person who has a foreign bank account report its existence on Treasury Form 90-22.1. If you did your taxes, especially if you use like TurboTax, every now and then you will get a question. Hey, was this money kept in a foreign bank account? Right? Also, any person who owns or controls a money transmitting business must register that business within 180 days of its creation. Okay, so you got about 6 months. So if you are transmitting, cash, okay, your money transmitting business, got to report it so that the government can keep an eye on you. And then the Bank Secrecy Act attacks the placement stage of money laundering. Okay, now let's get to the good stuff. Mail fraud, good old mail fraud. And this goes back, a century or more. A scheme to defraud someone by fraudulent pretenses. Okay, so it's already a scheme, a fraudulent scheme. But, okay, and such fraud takes place inside a U.S. post office, inside a U.S. mail depository, or through transport by the U.S. Postal Service. It's that last one that catches, most people don't say, hey, meet me down at the post office so I can commit a fraud. No. But if you mailed something, anything is part of this scheme, that becomes mail fraud. And you might think, hey, I know, I'll use FedEx. Ha, got around it. Wrong. Some years ago, they expanded mail fraud beyond the Postal Service to include FedEx, DHL, other type of UPS, messenger companies, essentially. The person needs only to cause the mail service to be used to facilitate the fraud act, and the item sent or delivered may be transported by private or commercial carrier. Okay, so that's FedEx and DHL. In furtherance of the fraud act. The scheme does not need to succeed or the intended victim suffer any damages, okay, for the mail fraud statute to be applicable. As long as you use the mails in some way, boom, mail fraud. So we see, when I work in federal court, if you see, very often you'll see, some whatever politician or celebrity or or mobster, whatever, gets arrested by the feds, and they'll have a press conference, and the U.S. attorney comes out and says, we have a 47 count indictment. Ooh, that's a lot. Well, every time the person dropped a letter in the mail in furtherance of the scheme is a separate count. So it sounds bad, but each one of those counts, each time you use the mails in any way in furtherance of the scheme, boom, mail fraud. Okay. Let's talk about wire fraud. Okay, mail fraud worked great for a century or more. And then this newfangled telephone, and telegraph came in. And now it's, radio, television, internet, all this other stuff. So a new law was passed, the Wire Fraud Act. And so it doesn't need a wire, okay? It can be, cell phones, radio, TV, to communicate false or fraudulent pretenses, representations, or promises. However, must be associated with interstate or foreign commerce for wire fraud statutes to apply. Because remember, the federal government, what Constitution creates the federal government, which is a government of limited enumerated powers. Okay, the states have plenary powers, so anything they want to do, they can do. Essentially, federal government can only regulate certain things. But one of the things in the federal Constitution is interstate commerce. So if it in any way can be associated with interstate commerce, federal law can apply. And I know of one case where, in furthering a fraud, the defendant picked up a telephone in his office, punched the intercom button. He was in his big office, and his phone had a bunch of buttons on it, as they used to have back in the day, and I think still do, on his desk phone. Pressed the intercom button and called somebody on another floor to tell him something in furtherance of this fraud scheme. And so his attorneys argued, Your Honor, the telecommunications, or the communication taking place here was just between floors in the same building. It wasn't interstate. But the U.S. attorney pointed out that, next to the intercom button was another button, actually several buttons for telephone lines, on which they could have made a call to another state. And the court ruled that since he used a phone that could be used to make a interstate telephone call, the federal wire fraud statute applies. Now that's kind of pushing it in my mind, but it's, and just because like a phone call might be to someone, somewhere else, but still within, say, the state of Illinois, because it could have gone, bounced across Indiana line to come back to Illinois, and because telephones are necessary for interstate commerce. Essentially, if you use a phone at all, we're going to consider it as part of interstate commerce. So it really is not much of a restriction. Now, the current Supreme Court has been pushing back on this, saying, look, again, federal government only gets the power if interstate commerce is involved. So, let's keep that in mind. So, but it's a pretty broad definition of interstate commerce. All right. Then we have the FCPA, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which the current administration is not too favorable with and has greatly cut back the number of investigations and prosecutions under FCPA. And what happened is after the Nixon administration, it was found out that certain, and these were mostly defense contractors, were bribing foreign officials to buy U.S. weapon systems. Okay, and it was considered, the U.S. should be better than that. We should not allow our companies to bribe foreign officials. One moment while I sneeze. And I'm back. So, the FCPA is a U.S.-based law that prescribes how companies should act with regards to bribery and corruption. The key thing, really, for accountants especially, to know is this was the first act that really now requires companies, if they have international operations, requires them to have good internal controls. Because the easy answer, if you've got an agent of your company in some foreign country who's bribing foreign officials, and it's found out and they want to, go against the company and its officers, and plus the FCPA, you can criminally charge the company. Now, I can't put the company in prison, but you can fine them a lot of money and prevent them from, say, any more contracts with the United States government, which if you're a defense company, that could be your whole business. You might have to, close up shop. So the easy answer is if you have a foreign agent, the folks back here in, the U.S. would say, hey, how am I supposed to know about that? He's way over there. I'm here. Again, how am I supposed to know? And the answer in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is you should have known. Okay, so it's not just you knew, you should have known. So maybe you didn't know that your, salesperson in far off, Cressy land was bribing the defense minister. The FCPA said you should have known. And you should have known because you should have had good internal controls and monitors on your foreign agents. And that alone will have your company at least be found guilty of violating the FCPA. So, so that was the way they answered the question of, how could I have known? You should have known. So FCPA essentially requires companies who have any sort of foreign operations to have good internal controls. It says here, willful blindness does not prevent liabilities. However, once it was passed, there were a couple of things came up because there are some countries in this world where bribery is fine. Okay. And I talk about, I don't try not to name the country, but one country, okay, if you have your big old ship, coming from the United States to this country and it pulls into port, there's a harbor master, and the harbor master determines or decides which ship gets unloaded. The harbor master is a agent of that country's government. He's a government official. But in that country, the harbor masters are not paid because the government decided, why should we pay them? They make enough money off of the bribes they get. So if you want your ship unloaded, and again, this was sort of discovered, after the FCPA was passed. If you want your ship unloaded with all those, your American ship with all those American goods, you got to bribe the harbor master. But the FCPA says you do that, you're violating the law. So very quickly, Congress went back and said, okay, we got to change the law to permit what they term facilitating payments made to streamline or expedite a service to which the payer is legally entitled. Okay, so for the harbor master and for others, we know that in some places you've got to pay bribes in order to get things done. So FCPA was amended to allow that. Meanwhile, over there in the jolly old England, the United Kingdom passed the Bribery Act. Now you might say, well, why should we care about the UK Bribery Act here in the United States? Because of the way they wrote it. Okay, the Bribery Act passed in 2010 was introduced to update and enhance the UK law on bribery. They didn't want their companies paying foreign bribes or bribes to foreign officials either. So they said, okay, we have 4 offenses under the Bribery Act: the offering, promising, or giving an advantage, the requesting, agreeing to receive, or accepting an advantage, the bribery of a foreign public official, or failure by a commercial organization to prevent a bribe being paid to obtain or retain business or business advantage. Okay, that sounds good. Now, it applies to, UK companies, United Kingdom companies. We're talking, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Okay, it's the United Kingdom. Now, operating abroad, okay, that's fine. It doesn't affect us, does it? Whoa. They say, no, it also applies to non-UK companies that operate with a presence in the UK. So if you're an American company, or for that matter, if you're a German company, and I don't know, come up with, I don't know if Germany has it or not, but let's say, again, the land of Cressy land. So Cressy land does not have anything like the FCPA, and Cressy land companies will bribe foreign officials. Cool. Cressy land also does business with the UK, and they've got a small office in London. Cool. Well, if British prosecutors, technically UK prosecutors, because it could be Wales or Northern Ireland or Scotland, but British prosecutors find out, UK prosecutors find out that a Cressy land company was bribing foreign officials in Frotopia. And the Cressy land company has an office in London. That's all it takes for the UK prosecutor to go and serve a warrant on my office, the Cressy land company office in London, and say, we are charging you with violation of the UK Bribery Act because you're a company that has a presence in the UK and you were paying bribes to foreign officials in another country. Okay, and you're based in another country as well. So UK is really created some waves by prosecuting the UK Bribery Act against foreign companies paying off foreign public officials in other countries other than the UK, and and they say, wait, it didn't have nothing to do with the UK. It doesn't matter. You have a presence in the UK. We don't, and we find that unappealing. So we're going to prosecute you. Wow. So this is where U.S. businesses come in. If you have any sort of presence in the UK, meaning if you're shipping goods there, You can't bribe a foreign official in another country. Okay, already that's a violation of the FCPA, but you can also be charged under the UK Bribery Act over in UK. Whoa. Okay. Uh, Additionally, facilitating payments are illegal under the UK Bribery Act. So that thing that's allowed under the FCPA, under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the US law, the paying off the harbor master, that's illegal under the UK Bribery Act. So even if you're a US company, you're paying off the harbor master to get your ship unloaded. It's allowed under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Oh, turns out you also do business, you have a presence in the UK, you can get charged under the UK Bribery Act. It has caused some real headaches in the foreign trade community. All right, moving on. Module 5, the US banking system. Benefits of it. You know, as opposed to, some countries with, shall we say, less than legit operations, everything in the U.S. banking system is written down either on paper or, in a computer file. Most transactions and their backup documentations are captured on, these days on electronic imaging, not so much on microfiche or microfilm. And I know that because I used to run a microfilm company. Went out of business because nobody's using it for the most part anymore. Okay. Bank account activity can be used to profile account holders, and checks are very detailed. All those things, good, there's some good parts about the US banking system in fighting this type of fraud. So there's a check, okay? Okay, quick question, everyone here. How many of you, raise your hand, how many of you have checking accounts? Anyone? Anybody near their computer? Raise your hand if you are. Well, it looks like everyone stepped away to get a beverage. Okay. Well, if you have a checking account, I'm assuming most people do. You might not write many checks these days. A lot of folks have a checking account, but they don't write the checks. I know myself used to write checks all the time. No, not so much. So if this is a check, the check number is at 0905. And then you've got the 48-567, okay, up in the upper right-hand corner, and then over the numbers 1234. Okay, that's not a weird fraction. That's a code that identifies the issuing bank. Okay, so it's the First Huntington Commerce Bank. Okay. The student that just joined us, raise your hand if you have a checking account. Okay, very good. Thank you. Let me lower your hand now. Okay, thank you. Oh, okay, you've got one too. Okay, thank you. A couple of students online have checking accounts. That's good. Okay, so there's that identifies the bank on which these funds, are originating. The American Bankers Association, the ABA. Now, I'm involved with the American Bar Association, lawyers. This is the other one, the ABA. Transit number, okay, where 48 represents the state where the bank is located, and 567 is the code that ties it to that particular bank. Cool. Okay. Moving on, and then you see, so we have there. It's the Jimmy Joe Venture Capital, a West Virginia corporation, which makes me think my friend Dick Riley came up with this because he's at West Virginia University. 1-800-GOT-CASH. Pay to the order of Innovative Learning Place, $53.21, $53.21, and it's for some booklets, and it's signed John Q. Public. And you see down at the lower left-hand corner, those would be those funny shaped little magnetic ink characters. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so that's like the code for the bank. And then we've got the account number of 02 00239876541, and then check number 905. And then the amount of the check is then next, which is that at the end, $53.21. Okay, moving on. Okay, so, all right. The numbers below the line, the 1234, is the Federal Reserve routing code. The first two represent the Federal Reserve District, and the third number identifies the district office, and the last number when the proceeds would be made available. So the amount or face value of the check is $53.21. Hang on a second. I want to do real quick. Excuse me here. My cat's sitting on my attendance sheet again. Do a little quick thing here to make sure I've got everyone on here. Yeah. Alrighty. All right. Coming back to my stuff. Okay. So again, the bank, the paying bank is First Huntington Commerce Bank. The bottom numbers are going to be in magnetic ink, so that when this check goes through a high-speed processor, there's a magnetic head on it, much like you would see on an old tape recorder. That as the check goes flying past that magnetic reading head, it can read those magnetic numbers. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is the combination of the checking routing number, 1, 2, 3, 4, the ABA transit number, 5, 6, 7, plus an additional 8, 9, 1, 0. And then you've got, again, the checking account number is next. The check number is there. The number 2125 is a processing code. And then you see at the end, the check amount, $53.21. So again, it's in magnetic ink. So when it flies past the magnetic heads, it reads all those numbers and records it in the computer. I know this stuff because I used to work in a check processing center, and when I was in college. So and those suckers, they fly through. Don't put your hand anywhere near it, or you will have the worst paper cut, and you're going to be bleeding all over the place. So don't do that. All right. So a new federal law called Check 21, Check Clearing for the 21st Century Act, went into effect on October 28, 2004. The act allows the first bank to touch a check to image the front and back of the check and then shred the original. Okay, so it used to be a check would be written and then it would just get passed along to the next bank and to the next bank. So that check from drawn on a bank in West Virginia, say you deposited it into your bank in Chicago. The bank in Chicago would take it. They would send it to the either a clearinghouse bank or the Federal Reserve, who would then package it up and send it to West Virginia, who would then distribute it, and it would eventually get back after a couple of different stops to the original bank. Not anymore. Now, under the act, that first bank, one here in Chicago, they scan that check front and back, and then they just send the information from the check along with that digital image to that bank in West Virginia, Huntington Bank in West Virginia. Okay, and then the checks get shredded. Bye-bye check. Okay. However, okay, so that's good to know. Cashier's checks, money orders, and traveler's checks are favorites of money launderers. Cashier's checks are often used as a down payment for big ticket items. So if you went to buy a car, the car dealer might say, okay, we'll sell you the car, for $500 down, but we want it in a cashier's check to make sure that we at least get $500 before we give you the keys to the car. Okay. The documentation is tied to a bank's checking account instead of the individual. So that's the thing. The bank would, usually go to your bank, and your bank knows how much is in your account. They'll withdraw the $500 from your account along with a fee. Although sometimes banks won't charge a fee for a cashier's check drawn on, their own customers. And they write a check off the bank And then, that car dealership can be pretty sure that that check is going to be cash because it was drawn in the bank. Money orders typically have a limited dollar amount. You can have a money order or even a post office money order, but it only goes up to, depending on which service you use, 500, 1,000, something like that. Again, remember, banks also have safe deposit boxes where you can store things. All right. Someday I may tell you the story of a client I had passed, or actually the client's family hired me. This member of the family passed away. Turned out he had a safe deposit box. He was the only signature on the account, but you're allowed to go to the bank with an affidavit to search the box to see if there's a will in there. So we went to the box. I went along, as their attorney. They pulled out the largest box the bank had, rolled it in on a big cart. We opened it up, and it was filled with gold coin. Yeah, that's like something you'd see in a movie. It was pretty cool. Over $1 million. Yes, it's something you'd see like in Indiana Jones and the bank account. Indiana Jones safe deposit box. Okay, so we have different types of banks. We have commercial banks. Most of us is where we're using, Chase or Bank of America, etc. Savings and loan banks, you don't see too many of those anymore. A lot of them went out of business in the late 20th century due to some economic problems. They mostly dealt in home mortgages. Additionally, you have offshore banks that exist in foreign countries. You have private banks established by individuals and businesses to facilitate transactions. We have a few of them in downtown Chicago. And so you've got actually some very wealthy individuals who essentially establish their own banks so they can get really good service. And then central banks responsible for maintaining and protecting the country's currencies, like the Bank of England. Okay. So, or the Federal Reserve here in the United States. All right. Let's talk about tools and techniques for moving money. And when we talk about this, we talk about the 3 V's. Volume, the amount of money that's moving. Velocity, the speed at which money moves. And it has picked up dramatically. As the Bank 21 Act. It used to be, again, when you had a paper check that had to move across the country, it might be a week or more before you had access to the funds. You deposited the check on a Monday, you might not, be allowed to, write a check off of those funds, for a week. All right. Now it's usually a couple of days. All right. And then the venue. Who controls the money? Where is the money? Okay. Where does it exist? All right. What about international money movement? Got somebody outside revving an engine. So advanced cash payment, which is advantageous to the provider. Okay, so it's like, I want to get paid in advance. Cool. A documentary letter of credit that protects both the buyer and seller. So this is where you're buying something again, from an international company, and you don't want to pay that international company $100,000 now, and you may or may not get your stuff from Temu or wherever. So instead, you go to your bank and say, I want a letter of credit. And so the bank issues a letter that says, hey, this customer of ours has $100,000 here in the bank, or more than that. And so we will give you this letter to show that he's good for the money. And we, the bank, will pay you once you come through and, provide the goods or ship the goods that he's buying here to the United States. Okay. Documentary collection is similar to domestic cash on demand, COD. Okay. Cash on demand. Trillions of dollars move around the world every single day. Additionally, we have open accounts, and the big one nowadays is EFTs, electronics fund transfers, where you tell your bank, take some of our money, some of my money, and transfer it electronically, wire it to this other person or company's account wherever they are in the U.S. or internationally, and put it into that account. Okay, this is how most well, you know. Even residential, again, it's not international, but residential purchases take place. A lot of electronic funds transferring going on, right? Okay. What about MSBs, money service businesses? Okay, they are check cashers. Okay, right? Because the currency exchanges here in Illinois. They also transfer money. They're also foreign exchange dealers. So if some currency exchanges do that, some banks do this, but then there are, now when I would be traveling to a foreign country, there is a business in just off LaSalle Street near the Chicago River, where I'm traveling to wherever, to France. I need to buy some euros so I can pay people for my groceries in France. So again, you use your credit card for a lot of that, but you need cash for certain things, tip the taxi driver, what have you. And so this little storefront, it's in a office building near LaSalle, and actually just off between Lake and Wacker. And you go in there, you write them a check, or actually use your debit card. And okay, and then you walk out with an envelope full of euros. Okay, so, and then also sellers of money orders, stored value products, and traveler's checks. You don't see too many traveler's checks anymore. They're still out there though, folks, and you can utilize them. Hang on a second, I think I've got one around here somewhere. Yeah, over here. No, not in there. That was there. Hey, Eddie. My dog just walked in on the scene. Stay with me, folks. It's be well worth it. Or not. I don't know. Is that my traveler's check in there? Yes, I think that is. Okay. Nope, that didn't do it. Come on. Yeah, there it is. Okay, I turn on the camera. You get to see what a traveler's check is. Some of you may have never seen a traveler's check before, and if you haven't, here is an American Express traveler's check. Okay. And the way it works is, when I originally bought this, so many years ago, I mean, the date line isn't filled in, and it starts out 19, not 20. So I went to a bank that sells American Express traveler's checks, and I was traveling, and I gave them, $100, $200, and they gave me then back, say, $200, 10 of these $20 traveler's checks. And while I was at the bank, I signed my name on this side. And then there's a blank line on this side. And the idea is, you have this, you take it into a bank in a foreign country that takes American Express traveler's checks, or even many hotels at the front desk, and you sign your name. And then the clerk compares the signature that you signed when you bought it to the signature you just placed on it. and goes, "Yep, that looks like you." Now, mind you, this was so long ago, my signature doesn't look like that anymore. But in any event, and they will then give you $20. Woohoo. So I still have this from when I was traveling back in like the 1980s. So in case I'm ever find myself down and out in a foreign country, I've got at least I've got $20 that I can get by cashing in my traveler's check. So that is a traveler's check. Okay, turn. Oh, I just realized I you didn't see that because I didn't share the video. Okay, let's try this again. I was showing the preview. Okay, here we go. There's the traveler's check, folks. You see on the one side is my, this side was signature when I signed it back when I bought it. As I say, probably in the 1980s. And then when I eventually ever do cash this, I sign this side. The clerk compares the signatures and goes, "Yep, that's you, Mr. Cressy." And I fill in, pay the order to, you know, France Bank, whatever, and or wherever I find myself, or Chase Bank, and they give me $20. Okay, that's a traveler's check. Now, not too popular anymore, but some places you still see them being utilized. Okay. So, moving on. Stored value products. That's like you check out at Target or CVS. You can buy a Visa card and put $100 on it and send it to your aunt for Christmas or what have you. All right. What about that bulk cash smuggling? Smuggling cash out of the United States for deposit elsewhere is a well-established money laundering method, often associated with illegal narcotics. It may be a crime to transport cash or negotiable instruments over $10,000 in or out of the United States if the funds are both concealed on the person in a container or conveyance and transported with the intent to avoid reporting requirements. Okay. Every now and then there'll be a case where somebody was able to convince, say, flight attendants for a foreign airline to, hey, tell you what, here's a briefcase, just take it with you, and then meet up with my friend in Bogota, and he'll give you $1,000 for your efforts of bringing this briefcase of documents to him. Well, the documents might be in there, but it might actually be $100,000 in currency. Okay. And again, if you go to foreign countries, you always have to fill out a declaration form just before you land, and it'll ask you, are you carrying over $10,000 in currency? All right. Also, you have to declare anything that maybe, say you went off on a foreign honeymoon, and while you were there, you bought your spouse a ring or a bracelet or a necklace or something that cost $10,005. Guess what? You got to declare it. Okay. Or you're smuggling. All right. Moving on. So, bulk cash smuggling methods include tunneling. Yes, that's the idea of building a tunnel, usually between the U.S. and Mexican border, where you bring the cash through. So you're selling all the narcotics here in the U.S. and you take it down to Mexico, put it, go into a nondescript building on the San Diego side of the border, and then there's a tunnel that goes down across the border and up in Tijuana. Okay. All across the Mexican borders, these tunnels have been found. Haven't found any that I know of into Canada, but everything's possible. Narco subs, yes, our cartels have been known to get the mini submarines and bring it across. Stuffed animals, always a favorite. Is stuff them up with, and then give it to a kid to have on the airplane. But we actually have currency sniffing dogs that will find some of this stuff. Body carry, as I say, like Eddie Antar, Crazy Eddie, who would duct tape cash to his body. And Operation Meltdown, the book talks about it offhand. I don't remember what exactly that was about. 1 second. Let's see if I can find it. Okay. Okay. Back in, yeah. Oops. I got the cat walking across me again. Yeah, that dealt with the latest one is a DEA operation involving illegal online pharmacies, and there have been several Operation Meltdowns. Okay, so there's that. So trade-based money laundering is the process by which criminals use a legitimate trade to disguise their criminal proceeds from their illegal activities. It involves a number of schemes to complicate the documentation of legitimate trade transactions. All right. So red flags indicating a potential TBML. Payments for organization, products, and services to a vendor by an unrelated third party. Where's that coming from, right? You see false reporting of transactions, overvaluation or undervaluation of products and services. Repeated importation and exportation of the same high value product or service, especially services, right? They're hard to pin down. Exchanges of products and services that don't align with the types of businesses involved in the transaction. So you're involved in a pharmaceutical company, and but they're selling high-end luxury cars, which also has become a way of money laundering. Get those high-end luxury cars, put it in a shipping container, and then ship that to the other country, and then sell it once it gets there. Unusual shipping routes, incorrect or mislabeled packaging, and multiple invoices paid for the same product and service. That seems odd, right? Okay, what about shell companies? Criminals who are able to hide their control of a company or trust can disguise their money laundering activity as a commercial transaction. Shell company generally refers to an LLC and other business entities with no significant assets or ongoing business activities, often formed by individuals and businesses to conduct legitimate transactions. Although publicly traded shell companies can be used for illicit purposes, vulnerability of the shell company is greatly compounded when it's privately held. All right. Casinos are cash-intensive businesses that often provide financial services and money laundering opportunities. Casinos on Indian reservations today bring in more money than Vegas and Atlantic City. I go back to when Vegas and Reno, the state of Nevada, were the only places that had legal gambling. Then Atlantic City came along, and now everybody has got it, right? And many casinos have the same types of services you get at a bank, right? You can walk into a casino, and you want to get some, chips, or more likely have some money placed on a card that you can use at the tables or in the machines. Sure, write a check. They will also wire transfer. By the way, Walmart also does a lot of services that typically you would only otherwise get at a bank. Okay. A lot of casinos are getting away from the use of chips. They might use them at the tables, but once you leave the table, they give you a voucher. Okay. Also, most of your casinos also have a frequent players club. Okay, or a club you join, you get points for it. You do that, and then every transaction you make at the casino, every bet will get recorded, and you can get prizes and free stays at the hotel. But you're also the casino is also tracking what you're doing, and the government has been known to get us a subpoena get a warrant and get that information so they can see what's going on. So if you're trying to hide transactions at a casino, don't join the Players Club. But just know if you do, don't now try to avoid paying taxes on your winnings. Of course, one of the biggest casino winners in Illinois is who? Governor Pritzker. Apparently, he is really good at blackjack and has won millions in blackjack. Let's see what, I don't think we have his latest 1040, but let's see. All right. In 2024, Governor Pritzker won approximately $1.4 million playing blackjack in Las Vegas. So he's apparently extremely good at blackjack. What do you know? Okay. Moving on. Casino money laundering techniques, holding chips and then cashing them for a casino check or wire transfer, using chips to pay for drugs or other illegal activities. It can be chips nowadays. Again, you get a paper voucher. You can use that as well. Gambling to generate certified winnings, exchanging counterfeit or marked bills or large denomination and foreign bills. So you think somebody is just giving you, you robbed a bank and you think they may have given you some, marked bills. Okay, take it to a casino. And then it goes away. It disappears. Using Smurfs to cash out multiple transactions. Using false IDs to open accounts or cash out. Loading small bills into machines and cashing out for a check. Okay, again, in casino floor, they have machines that will accept bills. Passing off purchased chips to the cashier, who then gives you a casino check, or just colluding with the casino employees. Insurance brokers offer a range of investment services featuring financial products that can be purchased and then subsequently transferred, redeemed, or sold, creating new opportunities for money laundering. So a life insurance policy with a cash value, buy the policy, go to another country that insurance company is located and then cash it out there. For example, brokers now offer a range of investment services featuring financial products that can be purchased, subsequently transferred, redeemed, or sold, creating new opportunities for that money laundering. Trust and bearer security. Trusts are vehicles where bad actors can hide the true ownership, of the trust. Bearer securities, bearer bonds are owned and controlled by the person in possession of the financial instrument. There's no name on it. It just says bearer, which makes them be very careful walking across town with one of those in your pocket, because whoever, robs you can cash it in. Informal value transfer system. Hawala, I always mispronounce it, Hawala, is an informal banking system originally created to support immigrants located around the world. It means trust. Hawala allows transfers of monies between individuals with no record of the transaction. The system is based on trust. It's fast, efficient, unregulated, and maintains almost no paperwork. How it works. A customer approaches a Hawala broker in one city, gives them a sum of money to be transferred to a recipient in another city. So, your mother is back in your home, in another country. You want your mom to, you worked hard. You want your mom to, get some money. So you go to the Hawala broker here in Chicago, give them the money, and say, here, I want my mother back in whatever country to receive this money. Along with the money, he or she usually specifies something like a password that'll lead to the money being paid out. The Hawala broker in the sending city, then I will call a Hawala broker in the recipient city and tell that broker about the agreed password. The intended recipient, who's also been informed about the password, approaches the recipient broker, tells them the agreed password, and then, and the Hawala broker in that recipient city gives them cash. Then periodically the brokers settle up. This is how the banking system originated, back in the Middle Ages, really. Okay. When you didn't want to go across the country with a chest full of gold coins, okay, you could, tell someone in another city, hey, give them some of your coins. I'll send you a letter. Eventually, we'll work it out. Or transactions go each way and you essentially settle up. Okay. Frankly, Western Union wire services work the same way. And a lot of bad fraudsters use that because what you do is you wire the money to a person's name, and often there's a code in another city. Say one city that's been very popular, Toronto. So it's across the border, right? So you wire the money to, and then the person in Toronto can go to any Western Union location in Toronto, identify themselves, show ID, and give them the code, and they're given the money. Okay, imagine the problem with that is you're trying to catch this person. You have to stake out every Western Union location in the city of Toronto. They've been working on getting that fixed. Okay. Virtual money. Money no longer has to be a physical commodity. Value is what's relevant. So money is whatever someone says it's worth, right? Money payments have been caught in the full tide of the electronic revolution. Money is money as long as it has value and can be traded. Value is generally stored on a computer server of service providers or financial institutions. The server does not have to reside in the country of activity. The settlement process can take place anywhere. Okay? But you better know those passwords or you can't get it. So you have such things now as prepaid access devices, internet-based money, digital currency, mobile phone, monetary exchanges and transfers, gift cards. Starbucks is essentially one of the largest banks in the world. Why? There's so much, like billions of dollars in value at any particular day in Starbucks gift cards that are out there. Okay. Payroll cards, remittance cards, general use cards such as, the Visa, MasterCard, and debit cards, and function specific items of value. So we have virtual currencies. And you see right there in the middle, Bitcoin. Okay, the first and still the leader. But then you got QQ coins, Linden dollars, Mint chip, web money, and it seems every week some new other virtual currency crops up. There's Trump dollars in that one too. Your cell phone and wireless networks are to the emerging economies what the computer and the internet were to developed economies years ago. They're capable of wireless value transfer. The effect of the shift from cash to digital, you have easy peer-to-peer fund transfer, international access, anonymous account openings. Okay. So you have this, know your customer concerns and possible open provider systems. The effect on anti-money laundering efforts. Internet and electronic value storage allows bad actors to select any form of payment to transfer value anonymously to the internet and seamlessly. They can then anonymously move that value anywhere in the world. International cooperation data sharing for analysis is needed for anti-money laundering strategies to be effective in the digital world. And we know anytime that you hear a case of ransomware, what is it? Children's Memorial Hospital or what's it called now? Yeah, they got their computers essentially. Was it Children's Memorial or was it the Rehabilitation Institute? One or the other. I think it was Lurie Children's Memorial Hospital. Were victims of ransomware. And as you hear most of these cases, it's like, we've taken control of your computer system. We will shut it down or we will not reopen it unless you transfer to us, $250,000 in Bitcoin. Why Bitcoin? Travel it, run it all over the world and you can't trace it. Okay. Again, Bitcoin got its big kickoff because of use by drug cartels and weapons dealers. Module 7, other complex frauds and financial crimes, tax evasion and fraud, bankruptcy fraud, securities frauds. Tax evasion, good time to talk about this. A week after tax day, IRS is responsible for determining, assessing, and collecting taxes imposed by Congress. They have 4 major divisions: wages and investments, small business, self-employed, and that includes excise taxes. Like you buy a new set of tires, there's an excise tax on tires. The tax is supposed to go to rebuild our interstate highway system. They have the large and mid-sized business division, and then the tax-exempt and governmental entities. Cool. Okay. The IRS also has smaller divisions that deal with appeals, communications, and liaisons, and criminal investigations. A lot of my former students have gone on to careers in the IRS CID, Criminal Investigation Division. It scares a lot of people. Accountants with guns and badges, but they do really good work. Tax evasion and fraud. The primary distinction. Remember, tax evasion is what put Al Capone in Alcatraz. Okay, they couldn't get him on all of his, bootlegging. They couldn't get him on the gambling that he was operating, all the and murders and extortions, etc. They got him on tax evasion because he filed a 1040 saying he was a used furniture dealer, and I think he said he made like $40,000, but they were able to prove he made millions. So off with you, Mr. Capone. The primary distinction is whether an individual entity has committed tax fraud or simply committed an error. Okay, so the difference between tax fraud and just whoops, I forgot to carry the one, right? Intent of the individual. Tax evasion is the intentional wrongdoing to evade taxes believed to be owed. Tax evasion is fraud. It implies bad faith, intentional wrongdoing, and a sinister motive. It requires that the defendant have taxes owing, and the evasion requires at least one, quote, affirmative act, end quote, that demonstrates intent. Okay, such schemes as deliberate understatement of taxes owed, the omission of taxable transactions and activities, fictitious events and activities, hidden events and activities, false statements made to tax agents. Oh, never lie to a federal agent. That is, lying to a federal agent is a crime. That's what put Martha Stewart behind bars. It wasn't insider trading. It was lying to a federal agent. So just, take the fifth and shut up. False documentation to support fraudulent tax filings. So you file a 1040 and you say you have 10 children and you don't have any. Okay. You're claiming your pets. No. All right. Examples of affirmative acts: deceit, lying when you're giving a statement; subterfuge and artifice, to hide an act. Okay. Camouflage, concealment, coloring events to make them appear different. Okay. Like, you sold your mansion for a couple of $1 million, but you make it look like you were, donating it to a charity when in fact the charity was an entity that you also owned or what have you. Obscuring events to make them appear different, or that charity then paid you, the money. All right. Areas where fraud can arise, we call badges: actions of the taxpayer, the treatment of income, the treatment of books and records, related parties, and the conduct of the taxpayer. I'm running out of time, so I'm running through a lot of this stuff. 7-step approach to convincingly resolve any badges of fraud. Consider the risk of fraud by brainstorming. Obtain information needed to identify the risk of fraud. Consider policies, procedures, and controls in place to prevent fraud. Respond to the results of the risk assessment steps. Evaluate the evidence by continually assessing the risk of fraud throughout the examination. Draw conclusions by obtaining taxpayer explanations for the errors, misstatements, omissions, and other irregularities. And communicate about the tax evasion or fraud by making sure that all aspects of the examination have been properly documented. And again, I advise anyone, if you get approached by the IRS, okay, even for an audit, I like to tell people, first thing you should do is hire an attorney, a tax attorney especially. hire an attorney. And you might say, well, can I just have my accountant talk to the IRS? No. Hire the attorney, then have the attorney hire your accountant as their consultant. In doing so, you now have placed attorney-client privilege on the accountant. Okay, so they can not disclose things because of attorney-client, because they're now working for the attorney. Anyway, go with get the attorney and have the attorney, hire the accountant as their consultant. All right. Taxpayer defenses argue that no taxes are in fact due. Taxpayer may claim that their scheme was set up to avoid rather than evade taxes. Okay, if you, put together a scheme that follows the law, you're allowed to avoid taxes. You're not allowed to evade them. Taxpayer may claim that the unpaid taxes were based on an objectively reasonable position based on a reasonable evaluation of the tax law, regulations, and prior court findings. Okay, so you have a tax shelter. Well, I hope you have an attorney and accountant that can explain why that tax shelter is legit. And don't try like, well, I formed a church. Yeah, the courts don't like that one. The taxpayer may claim that they did not have unrestricted access or rights to the funds. Hey, it's not my money. This you see this a lot with especially divorcing couples. Hey, my spouse had control of the money. What can I do? Always mental competence and capacity of the taxpayer and bookkeeper. So you had a bookkeeper that was no longer competent to be a good bookkeeper. And then there's a whole bunch of other defenses. Bankruptcy fraud. I did a nice presentation on this to bankruptcy professionals. Again, bankruptcy in the U.S. Constitution specifically spells out that bankruptcies are to be handled by the federal courts. Okay. All bankruptcy cases are filed in federal court at the local district of the U.S. Bankruptcy Court. So down there at 219 South Dearborn Street, where the federal courthouse is, the Dirksen building, there are the U.S. District Court, and there's also the U.S. Bankruptcy Court there, okay, for the Northern District of Illinois. I had a friend who was a judge on that court. Bankruptcy fraud includes schemes to file a false bankruptcy petition, file documents during a proceeding, or make false or fraudulent statements, representation, claims, or promises before or after the filing of a bankruptcy petition. So you file that petition, you say, Your Honor, I owe $100,000 in debt, and I only have, $500. Okay, but maybe you actually have $50,000 and you are hiding it somehow. Okay, that is called fraud. Okay, bankruptcy crimes are investigated by the FBI, prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Then there are also the trustees, which is a division of the Department of Justice, who kind of keep an eye on all the monies and stuff and can make referrals to the U.S. Attorney's Office if they think fraud is going on. And you can have individual bankruptcy fraud, and you can have business bankruptcy fraud, such as a bust out, where, for example, let's say you have a hardware store, and you often somebody had a hardware store and they sold it. They sold it to professional predator fraudsters who operate in the bankruptcy field. They buy the hardware store. First thing they do, they don't change the name. They don't want to know anyone's different, but they then take out big loans, okay, and buy up all sorts of, assets for the hardware store. Okay, they buy up all sorts of, power tools and such. And then they have a bulk sale of it. So they buy up the stuff and then they sell it at a bulk discount to some other party. Well, it turns out, it's a related party. And so now they have only a little bit of cash and they owe these big loans and they go, oh, look at that, we're bankrupt. We owe, $500,000 in loans, but we only have, $10,000 in cash. And remember, bankruptcy isn't that you don't have assets, it's that you don't have the cash to pay your bills on time. So you file for bankruptcy. Well, it was a forced bankruptcy. It was a bust out. You deliberately did this. I mean, you still have control of all those assets you sold at this bargain price. Anyways, moving on. So the bankruptcy code has a number of chapters, general provisions in 1, guidelines in 3, rights and obligations in 5. Then you hear people talk about a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. That's where dealing with businesses, generally, it's like, okay, you're out of business. Whatever assets you have left, the building, the machines, whatever, you're going to liquidate them. You will sell them off. And then you say you owe $100,000 in debt, and there's only $50,000 in cash after you liquidate all the assets. Okay, then your debtors get paid 50 cents on the dollar, and that's it. You're not going to get any more. The creditors get paid 50 cents on the dollar, and that's it. And the court says, final order. That's it. Sorry, creditors. You should have thought twice before you gave them stuff on credit. All right. Municipalities can file for bankruptcy under Chapter 9. A reorganization, you see this with big corporations. United Airlines went through this, where we're not going to shut down United Airlines or, for that matter, Red Lobster, but we're going to allow it to reorganize. Okay, and usually what happens is the shareholders get hurt. United Airlines, I have a friend who was a pilot for them, and essentially she lost most of her pension with United because of the reorganization. But United's still up there, still flying. She then went and was flying and flew with Southwest Airlines. So that's a reorganization. Special provisions for farmers and fishermen, that's Chapter 13. And then Chapter 13 is for the high net worth individuals. Be nice to, get to the point where you could file a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. All right. Title 18 of the U.S. Code identifies 9 offenses. These are bankruptcy frauds. Concealing of property. So you have property and you don't tell the court about it. Okay, you say you're bankrupt, can't pay my creditors, but you're hiding money or assets. Yeah, that's fraud. You make a false oath or account. So you sign off on a financial statement and it was a lie, or any other kind of false declaration. False proof of claims against a bankruptcy estate. Again, a friend of mine was the attorney in charge of the United Airlines bankruptcy. Okay. And he said you'd be amazed at after a company files for bankruptcy, they put notices out. Hey, if you have, if you have money coming from United Airlines, we filed for bankruptcy, you have to file a claim with the court if you're going to get paid anything. And you have until this date to file the claim. After that, you can't file a claim. And there are these fraudsters out there, and this is what they do is, on a big corporate bankruptcy like that, you file a lot of small claims, thinking that they won't take the time to sort through all these small claims, and they'll just go ahead and pay them. And you'll say that United Airlines owes me $1,000. And if they pay 50 cents on a dollar, fine, you get $500 when you really owe nothing or are owed nothing. Fortunately, for United Airlines, they went through all of those, and they had a lot of people arrested for making false claims. Okay. Receiving any material amount of property from the estate. And this catches up people. They file for an individual bankruptcy. And then let's say, you know what, my next door neighbor, he was kind enough to loan me $10,000 when I really needed it. So you go ahead and pay him $10,000 outside of the bankruptcy proceedings. That's illegal. And and you get in trouble for that. Of course, bribery in a bankruptcy, transferring or concealing property in contemplation of a bankruptcy. So if you're like hiding property and then, 2 months later file for bankruptcy, that it actually, they can look back, I think it's 2 years to see if you've been trying to hide property. Might be longer than that. Destroying or altering documents or withholding documents relating to a bankruptcy estate. Okay. Let's talk about our friend Bernie Madoff and his Ponzi scheme. He was serving a 150-year prison term for running what prosecutors called the $65 billion Ponzi scheme. He's since passed away, and it was uncovered in 2008. There's a couple of movies out there about Madoff. There was a made-for-TV movie starring Richard Dreyfuss as Madoff. That was really pretty good. I think you can find that for free out there. He started a firm back in 1960 as a penny stock trader. He was actually an accountant. But then as he got along, he would have his, he'd get the wealthiest clients. He said, look, I'll let you in on my private investment fund. And the private investment fund reported annual returns that were unusually consistent, around 10%. Okay. And it's a key factor in perpetuating the fraud. When you put your money elsewhere, it bounces up and down. It wasn't getting anywhere near 10% at that time, but he could get you 10%. But it would hush hush. It was only with top very wealthy people who gave them a lot of money. Madoff admitted he had not actually traded anything since the early 1990s. His investment returns since then had been completely fabricated. He had a small group of people that simply made up statements for the people that gave him money. Monthly investment statements were created for clients and were completely false. Okay. So securities fraud. After the Great Depression, in the late 1920s came the election of 1932 when FDR beat Herbert Hoover. Came in, and then the Congress, switched from being Republican to Democrat, and they said we got to do something to help our capital markets. So, they were sworn in March back then, not January of 1933, and passed the Securities Act shortly thereafter. The Truth in Securities Act primarily deals with initial offerings of securities. The following year came the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 that focused on the regulation of investment securities after the initial public offering. Contains a full range of anti-fraud measures. The good thing about the two acts is they both required publicly traded companies with securities that are traded publicly in interstate commerce to have annual financial statements audited by CPAs. Hey. So it was like the CPA Full Employment Act. Since then, we have the Investment Advisor Act of 1940, the Investment Company Act of 1940. And then after the Enron debacle of 2001, Senator Sarbanes and Congressman Oxley put together the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, sometimes called SOX. There's a photo of me with the two members of Congress, but I'm not going to show it to you because I was about 50 pounds heavier, so I don't look good in the photo. Any event, they were posing for me after I was named Association of Certified Fraud Examiners Educator of the Year. Okay, I've lost a lot of weight since then. Moving on, here are some common security frauds schemes: the pyramid scheme, the Ponzi scheme, the prime bank fraud, the churning, the unsuitable recommendations, parking. Okay, this means at a garage. This is your parking securities, front running, bucket shops, misuse or misappropriation of a customer's securities, market manipulation, insider trading. You want to learn more about securities fraud, I would say there are whole courses in this, professional education courses especially, that go into it.